from that, and let's talk about some of the things we talked about over Twitter. And I think we saw it. We saw it in New Hampshire, right? Hillary Clinton,
Yes.
The only demographic that she won was with progressive that made over 200,000 a year. And we were joking online, like I said this last week on the show, that you don't get a pass. You can't call, in my opinion, you can't call yourself a progressive anymore just because you support marriage equality and a woman's right to choose, right? To me, that's like the baseline. That's the level of entry just to be a decent human being. And then you shared your video with me from the Majority Report, which was a great video discussing how by day you have these so-called progressives who are gutting pension funds, and then by night they're supporting women's rights and women and marriage equality. So, tell me more about what you think in that regard, the divide that's in the imminent divide inside of the Democratic Party and the results from last night.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely on target. I think of three things. That video was about debunking this Bernie Bros myth, which has been really annoying me and a lot of other people. And the point of that video and the point you raised is that, first of all, it's not good enough anymore, and you've made this point very explicitly yourself, to be essentially, socially liberal and not economically progressive, not economically left. In my view, we need to get to the point where we realize that when someone like Michael Bloomberg, who sure has done some good things on climate change and has some social liberalism, when he compares the fight for 15 to communism, that is just as crazy and insane as anything that comes out of Donald Trump's mouth.
Right, absolutely.
And that's the reality. And, so one point.
I had to applaud you, man. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no, I'm with it. I like to hear it outside of my own head as well. But the second point is that it was specifically with regards to this race between Bernie and Hillary. But as you've been pointing out, and what I really appreciate about your work is this is a much larger scope than just this presidential race. Although I do really like and admire Bernie Sanders, frankly. But this really bizarre dynamic in which some people on the right of the Democratic Party, and by which the right, I'm just defining it, if you're supporting Hillary Clinton now, you're on the right side of this divide,
absolutely,
just in the context of this race, are using arguments that are, as an example, when I saw people sort of sharing a Ta-Nehisi Coates piece criticizing Bernie Sanders on reparations, that's a conversation for another day. But the point is as a way to support Hillary Clinton. Now, look, we can debate reparations, but that's enraging to me. I mean, we can go back to their records. Bernie Sanders never called black teenagers super predators. Bernie Sanders voted against welfare reform. Bernie Sanders said it played to our worst and most xenophobic instinct. So I think what we have is this bizarre way in which a very left critique sometimes is emerging almost from like a counterpunch article as a prop to support the more right-wing candidate. That's disingenuous. And then number three, there's a knockoff intersectionality, which, look, frankly, I mean, I think we always got to kind of interrogate ourselves, be aware. And I'm aware that, obviously I'm not a woman. I don't go through that experience, but I have seen, articles trying to actually elevate the fact that, Bernie Sanders doesn't use gender neutral pronouns enough as somehow really warranting a critique of him. And all I would say is, okay, if that's going to warrant a critique of him, then I'm going to be a lot less generous when I kind of don't talk about the death penalty. I don't talk about welfare reform. I don't talk about NAFTA because, I think a lot of us were actually being very supportive of Bernie, but pretty easy on Hillary on the course of this race until these attacks just got so disingenuous that we needed to sort of hit back.
No, you hit that on the head. Like, how do you take a Ta-Nehisi Coates piece that criticizes and rightfully so, right? In the proper context, it's a conversation that Bernie Sanders really needs to have with himself, right? But how do you take that piece and then use it as a means of supporting Hillary Clinton. It just doesn't follow, right? And then I love what you said about this illusion, really, essentially, of intersectionality, where it becomes tokenism, and that's what I call it. Like,
Right.
how many gender neutral pronouns are you using? How many times are you dividing up women into women of color, people of color, transgender women, and transgender women of color? Basically, are you hitting all the checkpoints? But then are you really dismissing the substance thereof, right? How do you go against Bernie Sanders for not using the proper language when his policies are going to be far more beneficial? Is it more important to you that he speaks precisely politically correct? Or is it more important to you that Hillary Clinton's policies are actually going to be detrimental to transgender women of color in a certain economic class?
Yeah, exactly. And I also think the other problem that's emerging is that, and look, this is a really specialized conversation in some ways, but this whole kind of backlash against quote unquote PC culture or whatever is overblown. And there's always going to be a backlash in some respects, because there's always going to be people that, what that really means is they're like, oh, fuck, man, I can't. Oh, I'm sorry if I can swear.
No problem. Go for it, man. It's all good.
Yeah, they're gonna say, oh, I can't, say what I want about, Black people, Puerto Rican people, women, whatever. I mean, we all know what that means.
Right.
But at the same time, there is a sort of obsessive attention on language and getting all of your specs correct, which frankly is just objectively can be alienating to a larger audience that you're trying to persuade. And what I see that's really much more than deeply problematic than that, with regards to how it's manifesting around some of the supporters of Hillary Clinton's campaign, is there's this sort of fusion of, on one hand, this sort of kind of self-caricature joke of a kind of, certain type of political correctness, almost, a caricature of the critique that people are enacting themselves, fused with an apology for essentially, policies that, if we're going to be really blunt about it, are, medieval level and beyond levels of inequality, policies that are incompatible with, the future of life on Earth being sort of viable, and military and foreign policies that are, if we were going to be a little bit more cautious, we could say that they're deeply destabilizing, to say the least. So if we're going to turn around and liberalism is going to mean for people in a general and popular sense, I need to remember each exact spec of talking about people in this very specific way, and then that's sort of fused with another trade deal that shipped my job, and another kind of SEC that isn't going to hold Goldman in check, and another bombing campaign that kills a lot of civilians and doesn't achieve a strategic objective. That is, that's like, I forget who said this, but there's the phrase of like, that's appealing as a, high-calorie broccoli. Nobody wants that.
You really just hit on that. I don't know that if I could say it better, but I just want to repeat what you said, because I need to hear it come out of my own mouth at this point. It's this obsessive attention to dotting every I and crossing every T, which to a certain extent I could buy into that. Fine, I'm up for it, right? But when that obsessive attention points you to a person who can match your need for that detail, wrap it on top of policies that are detrimental to human society, then at what point are you willing to exchange this political correctness for economic policies that are exacerbating inequality, for trade policies that are going to just ravish the labor class and the middle class, the foreign policies that, like you said, if we're going to be just modest with it, is destabilizing, to say the least. Are you willing to put all of your focus on the fact that Hillary Clinton can dot every I, which she can't, by the way, she can't. But
that's another point.
The fact that Bernie Sanders may not do it as well as she does it makes her that much more attractive to you. But by the way, yeah, go ahead. She can't herself.
No, I think not only that, I think actually this is another